Hello, friends. Welcome back to Heartscapes, where we are practicing Reiki at the intersection of self-reflection, spiritual practice, and social action. My name is Michaela. Welcome back. Y'all, spring fever has got me hard right now. All I want to do is be out in my garden. There is so much work to do out there. It's such joyful work. All I want to make videos about is garden work. And yet at the same time, Reiki always calls me back. This is my work. It is my passion. And so I'm back today following up on a series of videos that I started a few months ago related to my work on trauma-informed Reiki. Those videos sparked a number of really important conversations in various spaces, and it's been really enlightening and satisfying to follow up those conversations. And so I want to do that today with a video that is diving a little bit more deeply into the role of intention in our Reiki practice with regard to the potential for harm and the difference between intention and impact. So this video is a follow-up to one that I did a couple of months ago, where I posted an inquiry of what does it mean when we say the words Reiki can cause no harm? And what is our responsibility for being careful with the ways in which we describe Reiki with respect to harm and respect to the possibility of accidentally or sometimes intentionally causing harm within a Reiki session? The conversation sparked from that video led to a second one, really examining the difference between the sometimes necessary discomfort that a person might experience during a Reiki session or other similar healing processes, and unintentional harm that we as practitioners can and must take precautions against, and the role of trauma-informed Reiki practices to help navigate the distance between those two things. And in the conversations around both of those videos, there was a comment that came up over and over again that we had some interesting conversation around the role of intention inside of all of this. And so I wanted to just spend a little bit more time with that today, invite more conversation, invite your input, and just see where it takes us. So the nature of the comment, I'm going to generalize a little bit because there were a number of folks who brought in different pieces of this. And so just generally speaking, the nature of this feedback was that to point out that many of us in our Reiki training, myself included in my original trainings, includes a practice around intention setting. And that as part of the protocols for opening a Reiki session of any kind, but in particular one where we're working on another person, when we're in an in-person setting, to set an intention that inside of this session, no harm will be caused, that everything that happens is for the person's greatest good, to invite collaboration with guides, with unseen forces, with the mystery, the universe, however we want to name the unseen, but to invite collaboration from beneficial, unseen spaces, to uphold the intention that everything that happens in the session will be for the person's greatest good and their highest healing. And this is a form of diligence, right? It's a form of getting our mindset aligned with really what we're here to do, which is hopefully for all of us is to bring about the greatest good for the people that we are blessed to work with, as well as for ourselves inside of that interaction. And so as people shared this reminder of this protocol, this form of diligence that many of us learn inside of our Reiki training, there was an implication, and sometimes being directly stated, that this process of setting an intention and inviting collaboration with the unseen, with our support system outside of ourselves, that this amounts to doing our due diligence to avoid causing harm. And that if we do this and we do it sincerely, that we are essentially protected from the possibility of causing harm, and that the person we're working with is protected from receiving harm. And I just want to agitate this a little bit. I want to challenge certain aspects of this perspective, and I want us as a community to think a little bit more nuance and subtlety around this. Because if we play this out to kind of a conclusion, right? And if we put together a couple of different pieces here, we arrive at a place that I don't know that we actually want to be at. So let me just play this out. So if we're saying that Reiki can do no harm, that Reiki as an energy and perhaps even Reiki as a practice can do no harm. And this is the point that I was challenging in that original video, which I'll link down below or at the end of this one. If we're taking that as a given, that Reiki can cause no harm, and then we're doing our due diligence to set our intention in the beginning of a session that no harm will come and that everything that happens is for the greatest good, and we're inviting collaboration with unseen supporters, with the mystery, with the universe, then as a result of all of those things, anything that happens inside of the Reiki session therefore must be considered to be for the greatest good and highest healing of everyone involved, even if it appears that harm has been done. And that therefore that harm can be dismissed. We can reframe that harm as a necessary discomfort, a necessary part of the healing process. And I'm hoping that you can see that there's some difficulty with this, that if we take that to always be true, that we're actually opening ourselves up for some difficult times. In that original video, I told a story of one of my early experiences as a Reiki practitioner where I had done everything that I just described. I believed that Reiki could cause no harm. I set my intention exactly as I had been taught. I had done some work to connect with what I felt to be benevolent guides in the unseen spaces. And I stepped into a Reiki session. And in that Reiki session, I did something novel and new that I hadn't done before, that I had been recently taught by my teacher. And the response from the person on the table was clearly to be harmed. This practice that I did was something that was not okay with her body and with where she was at mentally and emotionally in that moment. And it not only frightened her, but it angered her, and it caused a very unhealthy situation for her. And if it's true that setting that intention inherently mitigated the harm, and that therefore that experience that she had was necessary for her healing, it's just not something that actually felt true in the moment. And looking back, I can see that there were specific things that I could have done in addition to setting my intention that could have translated that intention and that collaboration with the unseen into actions on my part that would have created a container for greater safety for my client in that moment. And that while it certainly is the case that sometimes healing involves necessary discomfort, that there are times when unnecessary pain is caused. And it's not because we haven't set our intention clearly. It's not because we're not being diligent in what we've been taught. It's not because Reiki as a phenomenon is harmful. But Reiki as a system of practice, actions taken by a human, all right, an imperfect human, on behalf of and with and in collaboration with other humans, that there is the potential for unintended harm to be caused regardless of the intentions that we've set. And I want to look at that from both the perspective of the seen world, right? The actions that we take and the ways in which intention and impact are not the same. And also in the unseen space, in the spiritual space, because there's things to consider on both sides. So if we take the perspective of our actions, our interactions with other people, our day-to-day experience, and we look at this, we can see that there is a difference between the intentions that we hold for any given action that we take and the potential impact that that has on other people. This is one of the kind of core foundational principles that I began working with when I worked for about a dozen years in social justice leadership development with students and nonprofits. And we spent quite a bit of time, working with ourselves first and foremost, and then also with others, the folks that we served, around discerning the difference between our intention and the impact of our actions. And that it is perfectly possible and common, actually, to have very good intentions, right? To be intending the best for people around us. And because of not fully understanding the situation, not being inside of that other person's mind and knowing exactly what they're thinking or feeling, not having all of the information that we need about a particular situation, or just the difference in viewpoint that is completely natural for humans to have, that I can have a really positive intention, but take an action that impacts people in a negative way. And that moment on the table with my client in the story that I told in that past video is an example of that. I had all of the best intentions, and I took an action that had an impact that I did not intend. And that this is something that actually happens all of the time, very often, because we just cannot fully know another person's heart and mind. We cannot fully know all of the different things that have meaning for them that might not have meaning for us, and vice versa. That we have different perspectives on what is happening in a given moment from the people around us. And that therefore it is always possible that our good intentions will not be enough to prevent a negative impact for another person. And that's okay. Ultimately, that is okay, as long as we take responsibility, as long as we pay attention to the impact of our actions, as long as we do our best to avoid a defensiveness that might say, but I didn't intend that to happen, and so why are you mad at me, right? There's a way in which we can lean back so heavily on our good intentions that we don't actually take responsibility for the impact of our actions. And that's work that we each get to do, right? That's work that we get to do, and that the system of Reiki gives us a really beautiful structure for doing. The precepts are a really amazing structure for helping us work with those feelings of defensiveness. Just for today, I worry not about how I'll be perceived, and therefore I can take greater responsibility for my actions. I can admit that I was wrong. I can say, hey, I didn't intend for that harm to happen, but I can see that it did in fact happen, and I'm sorry. What can I do to make up for that? Just for today, I can release my anger about someone calling me out on something that happened that harmed them, that I did. Just for today, I can have just deep compassion for myself in my imperfection, in my flaws, in my mistakes. And I can have compassion for others in the ways in which they are acting the same. So we have a structure that can help us do this work of more and more deeply being able to take an honest look at what is happening around us and take responsibility for our part in that. Taking a step back from a situation enough to really look at where our good intentions did not actually result in what we wanted to have happen, or that was, taken very differently by other people. So that's work that each of us are invited into, just as humans living in community, to get deeper and deeper in touch with our own sense of responsibility and our own ability to grow and to change and to pay attention to what's happening for other people. On the other side, the side that we might call the side of mystery, right? The side of the spirit, the side of the unseen. We need to kind of interrogate this even a little bit more deeply, because some of the conversations that I had in light of those other videos made it clear that, that some of us in our community do truly believe that they're in a place spiritually where that diligent process of setting an intention and collaborating with their guides is an absolute fail-safe against causing harm. And that by doing that, it's possible to release responsibility for any harm that might be perceived as having happened in that space. And that we can lean back on, but Reiki can cause no harm. And I set my intentions and I'm in collaboration with spirits that will help. And therefore, what you experienced as harm was not harm. It was part of your healing journey. And I want to invite us to really deeply interrogate that. Because what we're saying in that is a couple of things. Number one, we're saying that we, as a practitioner, as a imperfect human engaging in a spiritual practice that involves working with other people and inviting the possibility for healing, that we are flawless in the execution of that system. That we have come to a place of spiritual perfection such that we can absolutely guarantee that everything that we do is for the benefit of everybody that is involved. And I believe that it's possible for that to be true for some people, ultimately, after much, much diligent work. But I don't believe that is true for the vast majority of us. I know it is not true for myself. I believe it is something for us to strive towards. It's something for us to be diligent in. It's something for us to be open to the possibility of. And in the meantime, to continue to take a clear and honest assessment of what is happening in our spaces. Because if we truly believe that we are infallible, that we have reached a place in our spiritual development that we cannot make a mistake, we cannot cause harm. We are so in tune with the person that has allowed themselves to be vulnerable in our space. We're so in tune with them that we cannot possibly do anything that makes a mistake that harms them. And I believe we are actually setting ourselves up and setting them up for inevitable harm. I believe it is almost inevitable. It's certainly possible, likely, that if we proceed with that mindset, that eventually we will miss something. And we may not ever know it. Because oftentimes when a person experiences harm on our Reiki table or in any kind of other situation where they have come to an expert for help, and that expert has done something that made them feel deeply uncomfortable or harmed, oftentimes we don't tell them. It takes a lot of strength, a lot of courage, a lot of working through the fight or flight mechanism that happens in our body when we feel harmed, especially if our impulse is to freeze or to flee. We have to work through that just to be able to communicate with the person that they've harmed us. I've heard from a number of people as I've been more and more vocal about this kind of work. More and more people have confided in me that they've had experiences in Reiki sessions that were deeply uncomfortable, that they've had to then go work through, maybe with a therapist or just maybe through their own practice. They've had to work through the harm that was done in a Reiki session, and they never expressed that to the Reiki practitioner because it did not feel safe to do that. They didn't feel safe and welcome to express that harm had been done. Other times we are able to express that to folks. And then, what's the response? Does that practitioner take responsibility for that harm, or do they deflect? Do they spiritually bypass what's being said and say, oh, but my intentions were good, right? I'm the expert here. I set my intentions. I have my spirit collaborators. And therefore what you experienced was really part of your healing process. That's not hypothetical. That has happened to folks that I know. And so I'm just inviting us as practitioners, as teachers, as recipients of Reiki to understand that a lot can be done in the unseen space, and our intentions absolutely matter, right? It matters that we have good intentions. There's a big difference between entering into a Reiki session with the intention to harm and the intention not to harm, right? That matters. But it's not enough to guarantee that harm will never happen inside of a Reiki session, right? It's not enough to guarantee that we won't accidentally, touch somebody in a vulnerable place in a way that triggers them and makes them feel unsafe. It doesn't guarantee that we might not use an essential oil that has a scent that reminds them of something very harmful, and we didn't remember to ask if it was okay to use that oil. It does not guarantee that we can't take an action that might impact somebody negatively beyond what we intended for them. And here's what I invite us to hold in balance. On the one hand, we have responsibility for the care of the people who come to us. On the other hand, we are imperfect humans who make mistakes, and that's okay, right? But the question is, what happens after that mistake was made? How do we interact with ourselves around the mistake? How do we interact with the people who are harmed? And do we take action to do things differently next time, right? Because the most powerful, the most true apology is changed behavior. And so do we learn from those mistakes? Do we make adjustments? Do we think about this on the front end and put protocols and mindsets into place that help us to, as much as possible, never 100% possible, as much as possible, reduce the likelihood of causing harm in the first place, so that we can do our work with heart, we can do our work with honesty, we can do our work wholeheartedly without feeling afraid that we're going to cause harm. Because on the flip side, the fear of causing harm can cause us to back off from this work. And so this is what having a trauma-informed perspective and a series of mindsets and practices and protocols in place in our practice does for us. It can free us from the fear that something is going to happen because we know we're doing all that we can. It gives us a system of reflection that allows us to be aware of what's happening in our space, be open to feedback about what's happening, and have systems for making adjustments when necessary. It gives us simple perspective shifts that help us to kind of get out of our own perspective on what is good and what is bad. Oftentimes what we're offering to other people is what feels good to us, right? What has helped us, what has been healing and beneficial to us. But we can't assume that those same things are in all instances going to be healing and beneficial to other people. And so as much as possible, we can shift mindsets and we can put practices into place that help us to smooth all of that out and to help us take responsibility when things don't go well. So that's what I've been really focusing a lot of my attention on the past year and a half, and just have had so much joy and so much excitement sharing that out with folks. I'd love to continue this conversation. If there's anything in here that has sparked a question for you, and a memory of an experience, or perhaps something I've said that doesn't sit well with you, that you'd like to be in conversation about, I really welcome you to engage in that conversation. I think it's really important for us to be honest about these things and to talk to each other about them, right? To have the courage to have these conversations, either publicly or privately. If you're interested in deepening your practices and mindsets around being more trauma-informed in your practice, there's a few ways that you can do that. I have a class coming up June 4th and 5th, 2022, on trauma-informed Reiki. I also have a series of videos on this channel that introduce some of these concepts, and would love to also have one-on-one conversations if that is of interest to you. I'll put all of that information down below in the show notes for your access. And as you dive into this material and as you go throughout your day in your practice, I hope that you are deeply provisioned for that work. I look forward to being in conversation with you again in the next video or in the comments section. And until then, thank you for joining me. I love you. Bye-bye.